All right. I think that'll just about do. Hello, 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 ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to VUX World with Maaike and Sims. I am delighted today to be joined by an esteemed panel, which you can see just here. Hold on, there it is. That's not there. Here it is. It's up here somewhere. Here they are, the esteemed panel. Larry Swanson, Maaike Groenewegen, and Timmy Stoep-Alcala. Joining me all from Netherlands. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Wow. Wicked.
But also Netherlands.
Yeah. So we have a Netherlands contingent here. And the discussion is, as you may have witnessed in the description, let's rag and roll. Now, this came about from a post that I posted something on LinkedIn, and we had a bit of a discussion around this, which is the fallacy of the whole kind of upload your data into a RAG system and the models do all the work and everything's rosy. There was a lot of discussion going on there, and so we thought let's kind of get everyone together and have a discussion about the reality of preparing, managing, creating and ingesting content into generative AI applications in order to make them actually effective. So before we kick off, maybe it'd be nice, we'll start with you, Larry, and then we'll go to Maaike and Timmy. I was just moving this so it's more in shot, but what I did was do the opposite and get it out of shot. We'll start with some intros. Larry, over to you. Let's hear a little bit about yourself, where you come from and your kind of perspectives and expertise in the realm of content, because I know that it is fairly vast.
I'm right now I'm currently an independent architect based in Utrecht in the Netherlands. I'm actually in Amsterdam today for a Janus Boy event, a content management group that I hang out with. I've been doing content stuff for a long time. I think the thing I bring to this conversation is an extensive history in content modeling for headless and bespoke content systems and other kinds of content systems. But also I've been really immersed in the knowledge graph world, and world of that's a whole other branch of AI, the symbolic AI, the knowledge representation stuff. So that's that's sort of, I think that's what I'll bring to this conversation.
I'm sure it is. Maaike.
Yeah, Maaike Groenewegen, conversation designer and I guess prompt designer nowadays. But I think, Larry, we actually go back a long time together because I also come from the technical communication world. I have a background in instruction design and component content architecture. So basically designing content to be reused, to be modular, and to be pretty good. And I guess I too can bring both perspectives to the table, both conversation design, Gen AI, and the importance of well-structured content.
Wicked. Thank you, Maaike. And is this your second VUX podcast appearance or third?
I think it might be my third already. Ooh. I've got my headshot already.
Well, if it's your third, we need to definitely address it because if it is your third, you will be entitled to a VUX cap for the hat trick. So we'll have to go and look at the archives and determine that that's the case. And if it is, then there you go, VUX cap.
That will go so lovely with my pink boots.
Yes, it will go very well with your pink boots. Cool. And Timmy?
Yeah, so I'm Timmy. I'm a principal content strategist at IKEA, and I am not a prompt designer. I'm a failed prompt designer. I wanted to do more of that work, but there's the big work on how are we going to structure content and how are we going to move the teams and transition to headless. So all of that stuff is work that I do with my team at IKEA, basically. Content strategy, which in my book is also change management. So it's a lot of change leadership, I would say. And I think that plays a big role in how do we actually, leverage the attention now on AI and how can we use that to also lift all ships, the goal of having structured content and really being able to serve it meaningfully to our audience, to come up with the right content that matters when it matters.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And this is Winston. Don't know if you can see him here. He is hiding a little bit, but he is here. He's saying hello. He doesn't often have a seat at the podcasting table, but he's here today. So maybe let's kick off then with the notion that bugs me a little bit. I'm sure it might bug you the same, which is part of the, I suppose, reason why AI is so popular is because there are a large number of organizations that create AI technologies that have marketing budgets, that then have media presences, that then raise awareness and attention, that then results in popularity. And certain types of those type of companies may or may not want to make it seem very easy to use those tools and technologies that they create for the purposes of getting those tools and technologies adopted. And therefore, one of the things that seems to do the rounds quite often that I run into all the time is that for the purposes of creating generative AI applications that rely on content and knowledge, the whole use case of being able to talk to your data, in inverted commas, is very common. And the way in which you get there, apparently, is a super accessible way, which is you just grab all the content that you have, throw it into one of these systems, and all of a sudden, the models ingest it all, and you can just talk to your data, and it's all accurate, and it's all just rosy, and everyone's happy, and we all run off to the beach and smoke cigars. Your perspectives on that message and the reality of whether that rings true for you lot.
If I can just briefly chime in on just the marketing phrase already. Yeah, talk to your data, but no one expected the data to talk back at you. So that's the one part that people typically don't put in the equation. And the thing is that your data has to be, I mean, it's not data that we're talking to content. And content, even structured content by its very nature, can be very ambiguous. So I've done quite a few RAG implementations already. And what I do see happening all the time is the large language model retrieving two parts of information, which each on their own are perfectly correct, even in the context of the question. But when you combine them together, it doesn't make sense. So that's something that struck me. I'm like, that's a kind of a hallucination, but it's like a combined hallucination. Like, hey, two facts combined might still be not true. So talking back and not having control over that's a bit of a challenge, I find. Larry, I see you nodding.
Well, yeah, no, well, two things. One, you said it way more kindly than I would, Kane, that it's just a hype machine in Silicon Valley right now. And they're just shoving a bunch of what I regard, not nonsense, but like they're peddling generative AI and LLMs as the be all and end all. And that's just what AI is. And that's how you can solve all your business problems. And that's just demonstrably untrue. But to the point of content in that role, to what Maaike just said, yeah, it's like, that's just how LLMs work, that they will look and see some things that have like mathematically vectorized similarity and shove them together. Whereas I'm much more interested in like the knowledge representation world, an ontological understanding of your organization and the things you're working with, driving how you assemble experiences. So in the context of this question, I think it's about most of these like RAG architectures that you see now, the last step in that is an LLM answering the question, which is great because it's conversational interface. People love that. It sounds very plausible, but it's not always accurate. And so I think we just need to do some tweaking of these architectures and interfaces to have more of that human curated and created and moderated and understood content delivered with knowledge attached, rather than just grabbing it, conflating it, dumping it in your lap.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like garbage in, gold out. Right. So so I think it's trying. I think the way I find it fascinating how these like the messaging around, what is LLM, what can it do, what is RAG, like it's very hard sometimes to find like really clear pieces on what exactly is it supposed to do. Where's the human in the loop? And I would say actually the human should be at the core. But they don't really talk about it. It just gives you the feeling, if you're not really into the weeds of things, that it sounds magical. And therefore it can solve my problem, which is this content, which is maybe it's unstructured, but also maybe it's not even good quality, in the first place, and therefore would be confusing even to humans. And so let's now magically transform this, put it in the in this machine, and then it will become transformed, and it will become better somehow. I find it fascinating how that kind of messaging is going around, which gives you false expectations.
And is that the core problem then? If I read into what you're saying there, the core problem seemingly is that the crap in, crap out. So the data in the first place is or the content in the first place rather isn't any good. Am I understanding that correctly or not, Maaike? You don't seem too convinced about that.
Well, it's not necessarily that the content is bad, because most content has been written with really really great intentions. But it's just that in order for content to work, you need to be aware of the context. And if we just plonk any piece of content out there without being aware of the context, you might still not get the optimal result. And a great example of that is if you say, hey, we've got an FAQ page on our website. Let's put all these question answer pairs into an LLM, and it will, once the question is recognized, it will give the corresponding answer. But FAQs are typically designed for visual design. So when you go to an FAQ page, you see all these questions on one page. So that means that if one question doesn't answer your one FAQ doesn't answer your question, you visually move on until you find what you're looking for. However, if you put these FAQs into an LLM, you have to be very specific about your own question as a user to get the right answer, because that's how LLMs work. The more specific you prompt the model, because you're not asking it a question, you're giving it a prompt, the more specific the reply will be. And if you combine that with the common knowledge that people, especially when they talk to chatbots, tend to start kind of lazy, because that's how we work, right? That's how conversation works. I see so many people just typing one-word questions still. They say refund. And rather than disambiguating, like, oh, you've got a question about your refund, what is it that you'd like to know? An LLM will come straight to the point and say, oh, a refund. And it will just return the chunk that is like at the top of that list without even realizing that no question was asked here. There was just a keyword given. So making sure, because I'm a big fan of RAG, don't get me wrong. I think that for knowledge-based purposes, compared to our traditional chatbots, they do perform small miracles. But it's not just a matter of plonking in the content and letting it work. We need to make sure that the content is kind of transformed for the purpose that we use it for in RAG. So basically kind of dropping your network drive, with all the double documents, that's definitely not going to work, not as an answer engine, perhaps as a search engine, but yeah.
Because the other thing that you touched on there is the second part of the promise, which is that the first part of the promise is just give us your data and that's it. The second part of the promise is ask it anything in any way, shape or form, and that's the dream. So the user doesn't have to say anything specific. It's all about, if it is ambiguous, then the model should figure that out. And really, the dream is that just give us the data, give us the content you've got, we'll ingest it, you can speak to it however you want to, and all your questions will get answered. So there seems as though there's a misconception or a slight kind of, challenge on both sides of those. gap. Oh, yeah. But you mentioned content transformation. So that there maybe is something we can kind of get into in terms of if it's not a case of just...
do a little segue for Larry and Timi, because just one kind of final thought to kind of round up that blurb is that not only do we need to know what to reply, but also we need to know what the context is in which the user is asking that question. And that, I think, is where structuring your content on a task-based model and using different information types, hint, hint, might really, really be very helpful. And I'll leave it at this because we've got two experts on that in the team here.
Well, I'll just say that just for people who don't know, she's referring to the DITA structured content format. It's an XML format and it's a W3C standard. So it's a great way to do this. And these systems work better working off of that kind of content. But I want to hear from Timi, because the thing you just said about the transmission or the translation or some modification of content.
Uh-huh. What did I say actually exactly?
That was me, I think, about
I was
transformation.
Yeah,
thinking,
transformation.
Yeah.
But I know, Timmy, you've talked about that. I've heard in.
right. I mean, I've talked about content transformation more as in change management. Like a lot of these things that we want, like, okay, we need to have the right kind of content that's fit for training or fit for RAG or whatever. Um, that's another criteria that needs to be met by content now, while it also needs to meet other criteria for omnichannel development, personalization, like automation, all of these things. And I think there's a general, it's much more harder than that, like especially on an enterprise level, because then it involves so many changes. And a lot of teams, I think, and basically, I think a lot of I think in other disciplines, they still see content as a document, where instead of building blocks or like these things that we can model. And so that's what I meant when maybe when I was talking about content transformation, that we need the actual transformation of the content, and then we need also the transformation in the processes, which impact the way that we make decisions on the kind of tooling that we will need to get. And then I'm fascinated by that dynamic. I mean, it's not a new thing, but I think especially with content, that a lot of digital transformation areas actually kind of find their way back to content and to content transformation.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's very top of mind. No? Like content will be maybe the last thing that you think of. It's always the design or the data part, but the content teams, they're not always in the strategic level of these discussions, especially around AI. They're seen as to be more to execute, but you know that in order to create good prompts or even a good headline, right? We need to know all the rest. We need to know the context, and that I think is more glaring now. The more we try to have like wonderful smart applications for AI, the gap in the content is even, it's under the spotlight, I feel, which we
Yeah.
can turn into a good thing. We can use this for our advocacy for content teams.
Absolutely.
And how? Sorry, go on, Michael.
No, go on, King.
I was going to say, how do you go about that then? You're talking about content transformation and making content more strategic in order for it to be broadly more useful to the business and ultimately to the end user. And again, going back to that kind of notion of, well, all you need to do is just throw your data into these systems and they work. Like, let's imagine you're an organization that's hearing this, you're in that situation, you've got PDFs all over the place, you've got SharePoints everywhere, you've got this, that and the other, but you want to have something that adds value to the people who are trying to either create content or search for information or whatever it might be. Like, where do you start if you're in a business like that and you've got disparate content all over the place and you want to end up in a place where you have this kind of application that allows you to make more sense of that data and search it and get answers to questions and stuff like that? But now we know it's not just a case of just throw it all to the models. Like, what's the kind of steps that a business should take to get that content organized in a way that's fit for purpose?
I think there's two ways to go about. Very bottom up, which I can shed some light on because I'm doing this right now. But Larry, because I know that you work more on the strategic level, could you share some insight on, for instance, when a company calls you and say, "Listen, Larry, this is the problem that we want you to kind of help us solve." How would you go about it?
Exactly. I always start with bottom up, top down. And so the top down part of that means, like, what's the domain you're operating in? How do you, like I've worked with both Expedia and Booking.com. They're both in travel. They both have different views of the world, though, and they each have a different strategy and approach to how they're going to address their marketplace. They each have different ways of organizing themselves and their organization. So there's that top down part. But the more interesting part is where you start, and where I like to start is like the way I come out of information architecture as well. And you just start with that big, messy pile of stuff, all the concepts and terms and terminology and things you're working with in your domain. And so to be honest, I don't know how to sell this yet, because really what you need to sell them is ontology, but nobody's buying that. You have to talk about a domain model or something else, but you really need an ontological understanding of your organization, meaning the most germane way to this conversation is to understand what your users need, to understand the intent they're expressing in any interaction with you, to have on the other side, that's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is purposeful content. And you may need to go back to those old PDFs and even your old structured content and other things and truly understand the purpose of that, and matching that, your purpose of the stuff you've created with the intent of your users. And the magical box in the middle there is kind of the new content orchestration or experience orchestration, where you're assembling the thing in the middle. The thing that makes all of that work that I just described is metadata that can match what the purpose of the content stuff is and the intent of the audience. Like the consumer shows up, they want to learn something. You've got content that teaches. They want to buy something. You've got content that sells. I mean, and there's a million other metadata criteria that can come in there. So that's and like I said, I'm still just doing mostly old-fashioned content modeling. But as I've studied for the last 5 years ontology engineering, it just has taken my content modeling up a lot. And I anticipate in the next year being able to actually sell this, because there's more of a market for it now because of the limitations of all the stuff we're talking about today. All of these limitations that we're talking about, I think, are opportunities for all the content people in the world to just do more fun, cool stuff.
I want to hear Maaike's perspectives on the bottom-up approach as well. But first, there's something to kind of add into this, which is another kind of perspective that the technology companies in one way or form are kind of sharing, is that the perspective is you've got the data anyway, and customers are bound to want to have that conversation with your data. So just the information's in there somewhere. So what you're saying, Larry, is what the right approach is, and that's, what are the intents your customers have? How do you marry those intents with the right services and content? And then how do you give them that in the right kind of channel and UI and all that kind of stuff? But the counter to that, which is what I'm hearing a lot of, is don't really worry about fixing the customer intent and understanding the customer intent, because you've got the content anyway. So just use the content, and the answer's in there somewhere. Tell me if that's a complete fallacy.
And Timo on this one.
Well, before you know it, you'll be refunding products based on out-of-date knowledge-based content if you go that way. I mean, you should be so careful with that. And I do see where you're coming from, Kane, because I mean, I've done my share of traditional content modeling, and it's hard. It takes a lot of time, and it's really expensive. I mean, the only reason I got to do that is because I worked in aviation, which is very safety critical. So we had a dedicated team of content architects, information architects, and so on. I can totally imagine that for your average company, that might not be a reality yet, because, hey, if we have data architects, if we have machine learning experts, and content is the new data, perhaps it is time to kind of step up your game. But I mean, people still, your chatbot, if it's an LLM-based chatbot, falls under the same responsibilities as the rest of your company content. I mean, that's what legal has shown, right? And that's why I actually love working with legal on RAG, because at least then you've got like the bottom of, hey, this is really what we need to do here as a company, and this is safe, and this absolutely isn't. So when I work with RAG in financial situations, I have to make extra sure that I test my RAG very, very well to make sure that even, factoids are true on their own, don't result in misinformation when combined. And that's a challenge still. There's not a lot of support for that out there yet. I mean, for people like us who probably don't code on a daily basis, but also way more subtle differences. Like, hey, it's great if you've got a knowledge base that says, hey, in case you don't manage to solve this problem, you can contact support. Well, imagine being in a chatbot and your chatbot saying, hey, you can contact support. if you don't manage to solve it. Well, guess what? I'm talking to support right now. So what else do you want me to do? So even these small nuances, I mean, as a conversation designer, I'm used to making the difference with small nuances, right? And all of a sudden, we're just mass producing these texts, generating them, and hoping that they're kind of usable. I mean, what happened to user reviews and user testing? I don't see a lot of companies actually testing the generated output of what they create because everybody is so wowed by, oh, look, it's doing something. How is that something received? How do people perceive it? How readable is it? How well does it help them in their task completion? We don't know yet.
Yeah.
Super interesting. I mean, that really also shows like different levels of the needed operations around and methodologies for this kind of change, like in the omnichannel content development. Okay, if you're gonna put in this kind of content that's coming from AI or LLMs, what does it mean for the whole process? And that this is where then I go and put on my systems thinking hat, which like is a way to explain like why should we care? Why should we why do we bother with this? Because as always, I think one of the behaviors around content is when people want or teams want to change or whoever wants the change to happen, they only think of the one thing. They only think of a specific part of content that they think they want to change, right? But we know that a change in one thing has impact on the bigger systems where content is a part of, because content is a system. And I think that having that mindset will help a lot to understand like what's the work that's needed, from a bottom up approach, but also from the top down, and finding a way to meet. But because I think it's very rare that you get to do some work that's really starting from the beginning. It's already
Yeah, that's
I mean, content strategy folks and content designers, when we come in a project, right? Like how to not be a party pooper. When you provide, like how can I do my work in a way that doesn't make me a party pooper?
I
Because
know.
right, because you're going to start untangling the complexities. That no, it's not just this one thing. It's not just training it on this little thing. There's a lot of other things that that needs to happen or take into account. So I don't know. That's why again I feel like the whole ability to manage the change and to help people see like why it matters, like that would be a way to start to find out who is a change partner, I think, in your group or in your organization, like, and who would be enthusiastic change drivers, and power a duo with them. That's one way to kind of
Timmy, I want you to coach me on that, because so much
you have
of
to
this.
be a bit of guerrilla.
Yeah, no, but seriously, like I think one of the fundamental things we need to change is I think there's a mindset that's pretty well instilled in a lot of people who see these LLMs as like the solution to all this stuff, is that they fundamentally misunderstand or just don't understand the nature of an LLM. It's not like a database. It's nothing like a data. It behaves nothing like a database. It's not. You can't source the stuff that's in it. You can't find the provenance of that. You can't replicate things. And yet people behave as if all the stuff we've learned about computing in the last 40 years is somehow manifesting in there. So I think that seems like a fundamental change, culture change that we need to make. Does that make sense? And can you help me with that?
Oh, I could try, but what you're saying, I keep seeing this pyramid, like the iceberg model. Like you have the behavior, but you can root that from the structures, that perpetuate those behaviors. But those are actually rooted also in mindset. And again, that kind of brings back that whole the point that I think a lot of organizations still don't have a content first mindset. And it's very hard to to explain that without sounding like, oh, you're bringing this up again, or you want to sit at the table again, like
Yeah, but then again, I mean, first of all, I don't believe in they and we, but I also think that
Yeah.
LLMs bring an opportunity here
Yeah.
because everybody is so much into LLMs because there's one thing that LLMs are, and that they really are transformers. And I want to kind of throw in a little kind of nugget here and see how you react to that. When I posit that the conditional texts that we use to create as content designers in our source text, for instance, this little snippet of only mention, hey, you can contact support if the text is on the website, if the text lives in the chatbot, do conditional publishing and leave it out. We might actually use an LLM for that, so that we only need one generic text, and we tell the LLM with a set of really good instructions, a style guide, and information types, hey, take that really great blob of text, and for this channel, transform it to this. For that channel, transform it to that. That would be a real time saver, I feel. How does that sit with you?
That's interesting. It sounds like in the family of the new agentic stuff that people are talking about. Like
No, that's different. But
no, but I mean, but architecturally, in the sense that it's like a thing that does a thing, that it's like it's in an existing architecture and it's doing this specific it's fulfilling that condition that exists.
yeah,
That
it's
needs to be
basically a transformer, just like we
instantiated. Yeah.
had in the
Yeah.
olden days with XSLT. That's like ancient, right? But we used to have physical transformers that would take a piece of source content that was medium independent and audience independent. We'd run it through a transformer with a set of rules and conditions, and out comes your personalized content. But it was very static and it was a lot of work. Now I feel like, we've got LLMs who are masters at transforming A to B as long as they know the rules. And we set the source content really, really right, which we can do with RAG. That might be something really interesting to pursue, because all of a sudden, hey, you can tell your management it's LLM, so it's cool. We can get funding for that. And look what it can do for a use case that might actually help. Because everybody's looking for the golden use case. And I think that if we ingest our own expertise about content structure and how to do these transformations, might be something.
It sounds
That
as though
is super interesting.
yeah, it sounds as though there's a few steps involved here, isn't there? One is the understanding of the marriage between the user intent and the content requirements. 2, the process of either gathering that content or creating that content if it doesn't already exist. 3, having that content in, from what you're describing, Maaike, correct me if I'm wrong, but having that content in such a place that it can be accessed from wherever it needs to end up. But then a middle layer of LLMs that essentially perhaps that take that base content and transform it into the right type of content to distribute into the right type of channel. Am I understanding that correctly?
Absolutely, spot on.
Interesting. How much work? How much work is involved? Because that bit's predicated on the content that exists in that kind of like foundation content being the right content. So I'm curious about sort of that sort of initial step of trying to marry together the customer need with the content, and in all of your collective experience, like generally speaking, how mature are companies in being able to do that? And is it that the content is kind of there, but it just needs kicking into shape a little bit and optimizing a bit? Or is it that there's gaps everywhere? Like, how much kind of effort is it to end up in, I mean, for lots of organizations, the place to start would be for some sort of narrow use case. But let's imagine that they want to have this AI assistant on their website that you can ask all questions about the whole customer journey, and it's there to answer those sort of questions. Like, generally speaking, to get to there, I mean, in your experience, like, how close are companies to that? Is that generally a big, long exercise? Is there usually loads of gaps around? Like, I wonder if we can discuss a little bit of that, because, I'm curious about trying to figure out how businesses can get to that stage,
There's two things that are lacking, I guess, in most companies' knowledge bases or FAQs. The first one is the actual how-to. You'll be surprised at how many FAQs only tell you what, but don't tell you how to solve your problem. And the second one is that most company content that is user support is very much geared towards the happy path. So a lot of how-to questions, like for first-time users. But real problems usually require a lot more than just that. They have to kind of, contain some kind of triage, like, hey, what is the actual problem that you're talking about? And do we even have a solution for that? Or do you need to either go to a transactional flow or speak to a human? So I guess that the content that's there is basically all right, but it's just lacking in these two things.
Would you agree,
I
Harry?
think a lot of places aren't even, because you've been around a lot of places that use structured technical content in the web world, in the marketing world, and those worlds. There's very little preparation, and which is unfortunate. And I don't know, like, Timmy, what about a place like IKEA? Because I know it's a new and growing and quickly emerging digital practice there. How does that feel to you? Like that? How well prepared do you feel like your content is?
Well, IKEA knows how to do how-tos, right? In their documentation.
Well, to be honest, I mean, we have how-tos. There are product guides, the guides for the product, like assembly, yes, but it's a different type of how-to for how do you help somebody achieve wonderful sleep. And if you're taking it from the perspective of like a home furnishing retailer business, that doesn't just want to sell furniture, you want to be a partner in life at home, so that's a lofty goal. But to do that, how do you prove that with the kind of content that you use to communicate, right? Because that's the whole point. Like, how are we communicating so that we build relationships with our audience, that we can engage with them? And so I was kind of smiling when Maaike was saying about the how-tos, that I think a lot of our how-tos, like the product guides, sure, they're good, but like how-tos in general on restful sleep, I think we can be better. We should be. And I think now, if we're going to train then an AI and say, you want it to be able to talk about home furnishing, like what would that demand from the kind of content we're creating now? So we need to be, I think, like authorities in like different topics, and how the different topics also interact. We don't necessarily have a pipeline for that. So, like, am I saying that we should have how comprehensive the content should be actually in terms of breadth and coverage? And that's a question that I actually have that I don't know the answer to. Like, if I want to create content that's fit for purpose for omni-channel personalization, let alone AI, like, what does that mean for the preparation part and the actual creation upstream? So then when I brief someone on this is the kind of content we need, okay, we need metadata, but what are the other stuff? And I also actually don't know. So I'm also very curious what you guys think. That I've been wanting to post it on LinkedIn, but I haven't. But like, what kind of content do we need? Because I cannot wait for the entire content transformation to happen and for the pipeline to be filled with the wonderful content that's fit for purpose. So does it mean we need to to accelerate it? Do I need a proof of concept for the kind of material to train? So I also don't know the
Oh
answer
my
to
gosh,
that.
that's such a fascinating question, because you're looking at it really from a high level strategic point of view, and like, what does a good conversation about sleep actually look like, and how do you cater for that? And there again, I think that LLMs might be an interesting kind of new way to kind of create these proofs of concept, because what you can do with an LLM is say, hey, I'm not giving back content. I'm doing what we call adaptive responses. So based on what the user gives, I adapt my tone of voice, the length, the tone, the warmth, the amount of information to what my user is saying. And I've only been kind of experimenting with that in my own home experiments, but results are pretty amazing actually. You just take one single source of content, and based on what the user is saying, you get a perfectly tailored conversation. The only question, of course, is it still a true conversation? Is it still in line with your brand voice and your guidelines?
That's
How
the
do you
thing.
make sure that's happening? But the possibilities of LLMs in that respect are really interesting.
Yeah, Maaike, you just said something that I think is really interesting in terms of like, content and content strategy workflow is like using them as a proof of concept. because they're imaginative and they've read the whole internet, they know vast amounts of information. And I was thinking, my brain broke a little bit, Timmy, when you were talking, because I pictured my last walk through IKEA and thinking, like, it's not just sleep, it's like office and kitchen, and it's everything. You know,
Life at
it's
home.
like, yeah,
So
I
broad.
know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
living configurations, all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that notion of using LLMs as the proof of concept, like the starting early on as a discovery and a starting point kind of mechanism to start those conversations, and then like to what you said, Mike, it's got to be factual and accurate. It has to be a product that IKEA actually makes and you can buy, or an actual fact-based insight into sleep or something like that. Yeah, it's yeah, I don't have any answers for that, but it's an intriguing question. I mean, I do have answers for how to structure the content once you've figured it out, but I'm intrigued about the LLMs as a proof of concept helper tool.
Because another part which kind of has always frustrated me a little bit about every RAG chatbot that I've ever used is that, and maybe it's part of what we're kind of discussing here in terms of like how it's not the content itself that's actually the issue, it's the wider context that Maaike was referring to earlier. So for example, Larry, you said earlier on about marrying intent with content. So for example, if something's an educational based query, then it needs educational type of content. If something's a sales based query, then it needs sales based content. So essentially what that is that every business has pretty much the same kind of journey, doesn't it? So customers are trying to find something, buy something, wait for the thing to be delivered, use the thing that they've got, complain about it when it's not working, or get some support, or wrap in and leave the company, or whatever it might be. And it doesn't matter if it's sales or services or product. Generally speaking, there's the same sort of journeys. The only difference really is that the individual companies have slightly different products and services that then underpin each of those stages. But every time I've used any RAG chatbot, you ask it a question and it'll answer your question, but it doesn't really understand what stage of the journey you're in. Therefore, it can't do anything to progress the conversation. And I always call it, it's almost like the full stop problem, which is that every question you ask a RAG-based bot will end in a full stop because it's answered your question and it's done. So if I ask the question, which is like, how do I upgrade my phone contract? And I get a response based on the content, which is, all you need to do is pay off your contract and select a new phone and take out a new contract, full stop. That's not really what I was saying. The subtext of what I was saying there is I'm coming towards the end of my contract and I'm interested in giving you some more money to take out a new contract. But there's a disconnect between the content and the understanding of where I am in my journey to then marry that with, maybe it's more content at that moment in terms of what other phones are available or whatever, but ultimately it ends up being in some sort of sale or some sort of service or something like that. So I'm just curious whether you have any experience of kind of doing that, because otherwise the RAG system is just a conduit between a user query and content, but it's got nothing to do with the journey, nothing to do with ultimately the user goal, even if the user doesn't know what that goal is yet. So exactly. How do we solve that problem?
To be honest, Kane, by doing proper conversation design and use case analysis, like we always did, because this is something, I mean, RAG for me is great for, kind of replacing your knowledge base, like entity search in a chatbot. And it's also great for question recognition and long tail. But, and this is something I posted on LinkedIn last week. I feel that sometimes we're almost taking a step back. Like as conversation designers, we've always been trying to convince our stakeholders that FAQ bots are great as a first step, but you shouldn't stick with them too long. The real value is in either solving the user's problem or, fulfilling the user's wishes. And for that, we need insight in who are we talking to. So please do some backend integration and see if we know this person already. And we also need some kind of, engagement, some driver, like, hey, if we're talking to this bot, I really want to keep talking because I enjoy this experience. It's a delightful experience rather than just answering a question. And I think that gap, we still need traditional solid design principles for. And good prompting, by the way, because this is something that an LLM can do too, right? We can say, hey, if you're talking to this user, try to discover what their real intent is. If you see an upsell possibility, kind of weave that into the conversation quite naturally. These are all things that we can do, but we need to be aware of it.
Yeah. Do we
And
need?
I think
Go on.
I was just going to say, I think architecturally, I need to support Maaike and conversation designers better. Like I'm good at working with conventional content design and content strategists and content engineers and that cadre. And that's one of the great things about this era is that the conversation design field, we really need to all be playing better together. So thanks, Maaike. You just gave me a use case to figure out how to fix.
But it is part of the way so like large language models, obviously, I think would probably do a good job of being able to assess based on the conversation that's happening. Is this a service opportunity? Is it a sales opportunity? Is it a problem we need to solve? Whatever. But then I'm just curious about kind of like when you're mentioning tagging and metadata and all this kind of stuff that's kind of come up a lot. Are these the kind of qualities that you might want to tag as part of the content? Like this content is sales content. It's kind of like top of the funnel content versus this content is actually more decision-making content. And therefore, if this content's being served regularly, then here's a sales opportunity. Or, this content is support content, but this content is a real problem area. So if someone's serving this content, they're in a real situation. We need to get them real help fast. Like, is it that level of granularity that we're kind of getting to map that out, to marry the content to the journey? Or not?
Yeah.
I think it is. And those examples I gave when you're marrying, intent and purpose, that can go all the way down. If that's where the metadata strategy comes in, because you can align any kind of intent with any kind of purpose ultimately. So, but that requires a lot of work on both sides of the equation, understanding your customers. And that's where I'm really intrigued. A lot of what we've talked about kind of begs the question of decoupled architectures and what belongs where. And there's a need, I would argue, to get however you understand your customers' journeys or however you articulate, whatever metaphor you use to describe your interaction with them, there aren't many systems that do. There's some software tooling that helps you do those tasks, but I don't see anything that models those journeys in a way that you could ascribe metadata to them and help in this matching process. I think that's a big opportunity for some software startup out there.
Yeah.
That was my next question.
I think I would like that, I think, because if we were trying to, my team and I, we were to explain well, why do we need structured knowledge? Like, why do we need taxonomy? Why do we need ontologies, knowledge graph for personalization? And I started just creating sort of all of this, circles representing what is a content model, a content data type, what's in it. And then you get the level of, here's your metadata. And then if you look at another system like a DAM, you will also find that kernel, there's a metadata. And also in all the systems where content, is used or what touches content. And so there's something around knowing that all of them are connected and that metadata is one of those key things. What would help me as a content a strategist or somebody who wants to strategically plan the work on content? What would help me? What tools do I need so that I can actually get that connection? Because the connect, and I know the systems don't know how to talk to each other. That's a known a common problem, interoperability. But there's something around how can we solve for this, the managing the metadata or really knowing how to, of course, manage taxonomies. And that's where I think the knowledge graph comes in, and not just trying to manage taxonomies within the different systems, and each system trying to be the one solution for everything. Or at least in our case, a lot of the systems, they try to solve for everything. So you have silos, and we want to connect those silos because you want to get to that kind of content, and all these other systems and everything need to know how to work together.
Yeah.
Talk to each other, meaning how to work together as well, both the teams and the machines.
Absolutely. And I feel there's a big opportunity for LLMs there, especially when your taxonomies don't talk to each other or don't exactly map, because LLMs have such a flexibility to them that you can simply say, well, not simply, but you can definitely say, like, hey, listen, here's output A from one taxonomy. Here's where it should land. Can you please connect the dots there? It's a concept that I call ALI. So rather than API, I call it ALI, application language interfaces, where you create ad hoc connectors or transformers, depending on the content needs that you might have and the types of content that you want to marry. And again, I would love for some technical person to kind of pick up on this and kind of tweak my brain a little bit so that they can put it into practice. But I put it in my prompts all the time and it works magic. Yeah. And also another thing, Kane, one liner I want to leave here is I strongly believe that funnels are the new flows. Like where in traditional conversation design, we hard-coded flows with hard-coded content. We can't do that anymore because different people have different questions with different nuances, but we can create a funnel both for the journey, but also, for instance, for a problem triage tree. Hey, have we recognized the question already? If not, keep asking until we've got the root cause. Only then move on to the next stage in the funnel. If we define that funnel by measuring points and metadata, we can automatically bring in the right content.
Yeah. And the right services. I agree with the same approach when it comes to the more transactional based things.
Yeah.
The way that we've been approaching it more now is not necessarily about flows, it's more about gates or checkpoints.
Exactly.
So we need to reach this checkpoint, and to get to that checkpoint we need to get this data from the conversation. Once we get that checkpoint, we need to reach the next checkpoint, which is this, etc., etc. Which is that's really interesting. I think that what you were talking about there, Timmy, is the problem you're identifying is a similar problem to what most organizations are facing in general, not even related to content, but everywhere, which is that most businesses don't really know what their customer intent taxonomy is. And so if you look at the chatbot, it handles 100 things. You look at the IVR, it handles 90 things. But you look at an actual conversation with a human, and there's 250 things that actually exist that they need. So there's a big gap there, and so there's a gap at the moment in terms of understanding customer intent initially, and then with each intent, you're going to have content that's required to support it, and you're going to potentially have services that are required to support it. So marrying those two together, I think, is the way in which you will get that holistic approach, I think, which is how to leverage the content to serve the need with a view to get the customer the outcome they're looking for, which might be related to content, but it might be related to a service of some description. And all the things that we need to kind of make that happen, which it feels as though, because a lot of us have been doing this kind of stuff, working with this technology for a long time, it feels as though we've kind of been in the weeds and things have been progressing. But then you kind of zoom out and you think, well, businesses still don't really understand their customer intent taxonomy, and they don't really understand what content they've got, and they can't marry that to the services they have, and they're not automated on these channels. So it's exciting because there's still work to be done.
Absolutely.
Like deja vu.
Yeah, so maybe we can leave this with I know that we're on time now, so maybe it's that one parting phrase from each of you then, in terms of a business that's looking to get the most out of their content because they're looking to leverage a generative AI application at some point. Maybe it's a narrowly focused domain use case, maybe it's broader than that. What would be the key things that each of you would say to do in order to be able to leverage that content effectively? Well, maybe we'll start with Larry, then Maaike, then Timmy.
I'd leave with architectural advice that RAG is not just one thing. There's this rapidly evolving hybrid AI architectures that started with RAG, then graph RAG, and now there's people like Tony Steele talk about a neural symbolic loop, the interaction of knowledge representation technology and generative technologies. So having that architectural sense that it's not just AI is not just LLMs, to be aware of how RAG architectures can benefit from other technologies as well.
Brilliant. Maaike?
Know your user and test your content on those user questions.
Brilliant. Short and sweet. Like it. Timmy?
Find a power duo to discuss the architecture stuff and the content stuff, and see where's the most enthusiastic area that you can introduce the change. Because in the end, you can all go to the big parts, but find the hook, and just go do it and share.
Nice.
Sorry, I couldn't keep it short. Sorry
No,
about
it's
that.
good. It's good. It's all good. It's all relevant. Thank you very much. I think that what I'm kind of enthused to take away from this conversation is the grounding that I hope that we would find, which is that it's not just about grabbing data, throwing it into a model, and then hey presto, the world's your oyster. It's more about actually going back to those fundamental design principles of understanding customer needs, understanding whether you've got the content you need to meet those needs, creating it if you don't, and making sure it's in a format that can be ingested in the way that it needs to be ingested. And I think we also covered some good ideas in terms of maybe the next steps that we can take to transform content into different channels, or to marry the content between where it is in the customer journey and stuff like that. So I think that was really great. Yeah, thank you all very much for your time. It's been really appreciated.
Pleasure.
Nice
Thank
one.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kane.
Thank you all for tuning in. Join me again on Wednesday when I'll be speaking to the CEO of Ciara about quality assurance in generative AI models. Until then, see you soon.